Hi! I think we are just about at capacity, so we're going to get started. This is a great turnout. I'm so excited. So for any of you that don't know me, I am Leah Richard. I'm the museum administrator and curator here. And I'm so excited to see so many of you for the speaker series this year. This is our kickoff event for 2023. And today we have Dean Pyers, the executive director of the Steam Railroading Institute. Thank you. In Owasso. So a great organization. And so today he'll be talking to us about train robberies in Michigan. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see such a great turnout, and thank you for your interest in history and supporting the Vicksburg Historical Village. We hope you are all active members here, taking care of what's a beautiful. I've not been to this part of the state before, so it's a wonderful collection you have here. Very interesting. I enjoyed walking around for a little bit prior to the meeting. So.
We're always glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're very impressed.
Yeah. Joining me today is one of my volunteers up at the Railroad Institute, Bruce Cooper. He also does presentations and he car hosts for us on the North Pole Express. So I'll talk a little bit about who we are at the Steam Railroading Institute and what we do. And then we'll go right into the history of train robberies in Michigan. And might be more than you would have expected or more than you would realize. So that's the topic of our talk today. Our mission statement at SRI, or the Steam Railroading Institute, is to educate the public about steam-era railroad technology and the impact that it had on the economy and culture here in the Great Lakes region. We do that by safely operating steam railroading equipment. We do operate trains. And we also maintain, display, and interpret them along with some exhibits of that era. We own some land in Owasso. Owasso, if you're not familiar, is about 20 miles west of Flint, due west of Flint. So we're between Flint and Lansing. We are in the former Ann Arbor Railroad Yard. The Ann Arbor line was a Michigan railroad that went from Toledo up through Ann Arbor, of course, and then managed to miss every other large city in the state on its way over to the boat docks up at Frankfort. So their claim to fame, or what they did, was agricultural products, some manufacturing, some industry, but they also ran ferry boat service across Lake Michigan. As early as 1890, getting through Chicago annoyed people. Their shipments went into Chicago, never came out. And so the railroads here in Michigan started developing car ferry service where they could bypass Chicago, and the Ann Arbor was one of those lines. So Owasso was always one of the major backshop towns. The large railroad facilities were not always in the big cities. Those were terminals, those were endpoints. They'd get into the middle of their line and build the headquarters and the large shop complexes to rebuild the locomotives. And that's what we had here for the Ann Arbor. We own, wrong button. Okay. We own about 5.5 acres of the old yard. The rest of it is still an active freight line, the Great Lakes Central Railroad. You see their diesel shop facilities back here. At one time, there was a 12-stall roundhouse, some back shop buildings, a wood shop. They built their own cars, the Ann Arbor did. In a city at the time of about, right now, I think Owasso is 18,000 people. At a time when there were 4,000 or 5,000 residents, there were 600 people employed by the railroad in the early 1900s. So we do own our property, and we're working on developing some site infrastructure. We are mostly volunteers. There's 10 of us on the staff, 7 full-time, 3 part-timers. Everybody else you see, including in some of the large group photos that we take when we're running an excursion, everybody else you see in that photo is a volunteer, including the train crews, the car hosts that you run into. and our locomotive is known as being the locomotive that was featured in the Polar Express movie. If you watched the movie, all the animation, the sound recordings, the railroad sounds of air compressors and brakes and car doors, that was all recorded here in Michigan. We do a North Pole Express train every year. If you have tickets this year, we just went on sale last week. If you have tickets, congratulations. If you don't, we're already sold out. We sold out in about 3 hours. And if I left you in the online queue for an extraordinary amount of time, I do apologize. We're still working through some technical issues. Every year we get swamped. Our IT folks think we've got it all solved and fixed, and then something else. So we're still working through that. But you can drive up. We visit a country Christmas. We go to a little village about 25 miles north of us up in Ashley, and you can drive to the village and see us come in. You can see the train come into town. A lot of people do that if they were unable to get tickets. We do have an informal little speakers bureau. As I said, Bruce is one of our presenters. There's 3 or 4 others of us that do these talks when we're invited to a library, historical society, Rotary Club, Chamber of Commerce, whoever might need a speaker.
Schools, churches,
yeah,
everything.
Yeah. Our standard speech is the history of the Paramarquette 1225 locomotive and our involvement with the movie, more of the Polar Express theme. A new project that we're working on, we're restoring another locomotive, Chicago Northwestern 175, which worked up in the Upper Peninsula. And then the one you're going to be hearing today, the train robberies of Michigan, or Michigan train robberies. And we also have one of the history of railroad fan trips. Back in the day when people traveled a lot by train, they would organize excursions just to go see a factory or something. And it was kind of an interesting story there.
A paper factory.
So yeah. So here in Vix, a couple notes, and of course you're all going to be very familiar, more familiar with this than I. But your location here, in Vicksburg, intersection of 2 railroad lines. In 1900, 1920, that was a big deal. You had the Grand Trunk line running from Port Huron to Chicago. And then you also had the Grand Rapids in Indiana, from Fort Wayne up to Grand Rapids. So you could go both north, south, east, west, right from this village, from this town. And that was, like I said, that was a big deal. You'd have to change trains if you're going to Detroit, but you could hit lots of other major cities in the area or in the region with one move on the train or one easy connection. Of course, the depot, an old photo. All these photos are from either MichiganRailroads.com, which is a collection of all things railroading in Michigan, or your website here at the Historical Society. The Grand Rapids in Indiana always kind of fascinates me because they always referred to it in the early days as the fishing line. You know, their reason for existence was to take people fishing up north of Grand Rapids, so they called themselves the fishing line. But you've done a wonderful job preserving it. Congratulations on that, for keeping it up to date and decorated. And another photo also off of your website, the ice harvest. Prior to electric refrigeration, mechanical refrigeration, humans had to store up ice if they were going to keep fresh food into the summer months. And there's a Grand Trunk freight train being loaded with ice out of the lake. So sometimes when we get started with these presentations, we talk a little bit, or we're often asked, well, how did you get? Why did you do this research? How did you get interested in this topic? So why dig into train robberies in the state of Michigan or in the Midwest? Well, up at SRI, occasionally we do shorter trips around town. We do little theme things. And for a while, we were doing a hobo or a Wild West, a train robbery show, a little Wild West thing, the Midwesterners with a really bad Western drawl would get on the train and hold up the passengers, and the kids liked it, and the actors and our crew liked it, but some of us as historians kind of looked the other way and really didn't. I'll just go over here and oil the engine. I don't want to get too close to what's going on.
We had more fun.
Yeah. Everybody had. And so, in the back of my mind, doing a few of these. In the back of my mind, I'd always kind of wondered, well, I wonder if there were. Think about Jesse J. The hole in the wall out west and all the Missouri and further west. I wonder if there were some stories here in Michigan. Maybe if we found them, maybe we could slip in a little accidental history, on the way back and tell people, there were a few stories that go along with this. About the same time, we had done a presentation at a library, and a few years later, they called us back. So, would you like to do another one? Yeah, sure. It was Hamburg, Michigan, down in the Ann Arbor area. And the librarian there asked, she said, well, if you come next month, we're doing Murder on the Orient Express. That's our Book of the Month club. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the Orient Express train, Agatha Christie. Sure, I can add some of that. And then she says, and maybe you could throw in a famous murder that happened on a train in Michigan. And I said, well, do you know of any? Were there any? So now I've got two reasons to kind of dig into this. So where do we go in 2017, 2018? We just go to the internet and start browsing through Google searches and newspaper.com. If you haven't used the newspapers.com site, it's an incredible storage of old newspapers. It's easily searchable, free for a month or a week or whatever it was. And so you just start typing in, your different search terms. Train robbed in Michigan, train robberies, and what do you come up with? Well, it turns out that train robberies still happen. Freight cars, intermodal containers are still broken into today. A few years ago, in 2017, this one caught a lot of attention because the crooks in Chicago, it just happened to accidentally, I'm sure, open up a container that was filled with Remington rifles that were coming out of the... They may have known what they were looking for in a yard filled with 10,000 containers. They might have known what they were looking for. That got everybody a little bit excited. There was a case in the 80s. Some thieves broke into a boxcar, stole some Bud Light, which Old Milwaukee Light, which the writer of the story said was tantamount to stealing water, but they threw a few cases of Old Milwaukee out of the boxcar. And in 1970, again, it was in Detroit, and in this case, the thieves probably didn't know what they were breaking into because they got baby rattles and baby strollers. But of course, what we're talking about, or what we're focused on here, are those older, more romantic era of train robberies, and that's the actual Butch Cassidy and the Hole in the Wall game. That's a picture of Butch and Sundance there. Let's see. I believe that one is Butch, and I think Sundance Kid was that one. I believe.
And the hole in the wall is the guy in the middle.
Yeah. So, the history of train robberies in general, the first recorded incident, of course, it occurred over in Great Britain. England's rail service was a few years ahead of what we were doing over here. And there was a mail train robbed as early as 1849. Here in the States, or here in the U.S., both the states of Indiana and Ohio claim the first train robbery. One train was stopped at a station and the other one was moving. So the state that has the moving train claims that theirs is the real one, the real train robbery. Both were on the Baltimore and Ohio, later Baltimore and Ohio, the Ohio and Mississippi line out of Cincinnati headed to St. Louis. Why train robbers first started in that area, I'm not sure, but there were a couple on that line just after the Civil War, and some of the premise or some of the theory is that the trains were now hauling more valuables, more passengers, more jewelry, more currency, and there were more express cars when you come out of the Civil War era, and some of the displaced soldiers had resorted to various criminal activity by that point. So you start to get some stories of train robberies. Fixed targets or stations, the depot, the small town station, the safe was often the target for burglaries. Again, the Civil War era and a few years after, around Jackson, a couple of times in Jackson. The one on the far right here was kind of an interesting story in the newspaper. They were unsuccessful. They showed up at the depot to rob the safe and realized they had not brought any tools, so they had to go next door to the hardware store to steal the tools, which they then used in an unsuccessful attempt to break into the station and the safe. So they managed to accrue two different robbery attempts in one visit. But again, we'll focus more on the moving trains or criminal or the train robberies on a moving train. First one I found so far was in May of 1874, and I copy this with. I'm from a small town in Ohio, south of Toledo, Perrysburg, Ohio, and this story appeared in the Perrysburg newspaper, and this was recorded in newspapers.com. So when you think about it, in 1874, the people who lived in the little village where I came from, a few days after the event, could read about train robbers that robbed the Michigan Central. So the Michigan Central line is Detroit, Ann Arbor, Jackson, down into Kalamazoo, Chicago. People observing the train noticed that somebody was hanging around in an unusual manner in between the cars and the vestibules, riding in a place that's not to be desired except for those whose fate has relegated to impecuniosity. Okay, be honest. How many of you know what the word impecuniosity means? I didn't either. I had to look it up. My 1874 ancestors apparently had better dictionaries than I did, or the condition of being extremely poor was what they were trying to say. They hopped again, starting to get scenes and images from every old time Western railway robbery movie that you've ever watched. They hopped across the tops of the cars. They emerged from their hiding place. They emerged from the vestibule area or underneath. They about 9 o'clock at night, as the sun's setting, they're hopping along the car. They swing down into the express car and break their way in. The express car was always the destination. Not so much the passengers. Sometimes they would go through the passenger cars, but the express car is where the good stuff was. The Wells Fargo, American Express, Adams Express, later the Railway Express Agency. They carried safes on the trains, and there was an armed agent in there oftentimes who was administering the books, but they were carrying money to banks along the line. They had mail, stock certificates, in those days paper, right? If you bought some stock from a company, and these are negotiable. If you can steal them, you can sell them to somebody else. So in this particular, and this is the first one, and it ends with some gunplay. The American Express agent, Mr. Heath, before he passes out, fires a shot, kills one of the robbers, and the survivor flees with $2,700 in 1874 currency, roughly $70,000. Immediately then, of course, they're searching for the accomplice. 4 weeks later, and this is appearing in the Scranton Tribune. Again, you find not just Michigan papers picking these stories up. It's going out on the wire. It's going out on the telegraph wire and appearing in a variety of papers around the country. A detective for the Howe's Circus, an employee of a circus was arrested by the American Express Company's detective who had tracked him down, and they were quite convinced that they had the right guy. Except 6 weeks later, they report they arrested a different accomplice, a different second guy. This case, a painter from Three Rivers, from here in Michigan, was charged. The article says that the evidence is strong. And then the newspaper finishes up with, he had an alibi and he was released. So 150 years on, sometimes some of these stories aren't quite clear, but we are certain that there was a robbery and the basic facts of the case occurred that way. Jumping ahead 13 years, and this is on the Grand Trunk line. So now this is the line that's passing through Vicksburg here. This is over at the Port Huron end. This is in Sarnia, Port Huron, or the Fort Gratiot area. Prior to the tunnel going under the St. Clair River, the ferry boat would have carried the passengers or carried the passenger cars across the river from Sarnia into Port Huron, Fort Gratiot area. And shortly after that, as the train's being assembled, or shortly after they leave, in this particular case, the passengers themselves are robbed. Now we have three robbers going through the train. And the report that I copied on this one, this is from the New York Times the next day. So again, think about it, 1887, you can live in New York or Chicago and read the story of a relatively small town in Michigan having a train robbery, and you're reading about it in the paper the next day. The depot the Fort Gratiot Depot is still there, right underneath the Blue Water Bridge, the Thomas Edison Depot. Thomas Edison was known to have lived there as a child, and he learned telegraphy, and he was a news butcher, a newspaper salesman, newspaper, candy, cigarettes on the train. As a teenager, he would ride the trains out of Port Huron. As I said, they arrested three folks pretty quickly. Again, the media 150 years ago didn't always get things right. In Minneapolis, they thought there was a town called Sarnia, Michigan. So they merged the whole Sarnia, Ontario ferry boat train into Port Huron thing. And they also mentioned that the railroad company, the Grand Trunk System, may have been trying to keep this story quiet because they were offering pay to the passengers that lost their valuables. You lost that $7 wrist. You lost that $7 pocket watch. Here's $10. Just don't say anything bad about our railroad. We want to make sure people still feel it's safe to travel on the line. Jumping into the new century, into 1900 or early 1900, 1914. Again, Michigan Central train, that line between Detroit and Chicago, pretty popular. Follow the money, right? Where's the money going to be traveling on the highest capacity, highest populated line? A lot of times these stories started to appear along with other stories in the sidebars of newspapers. You'd get several of them stacked up. In this case, Decatur, Illinois reported there was one here in Michigan, and then there was also one in Chattanooga the same day. So there'd be a little theme, or kind of like the kind of like the CNN scroll, the scrolling bar on CNN or Fox News. The newspapers had that same thing with the sidebars and the as things would happen, they grouped the stories together, and you'd read about several instances. In this case, although it occurred out in Parma, the investigation took people into Detroit. The suspect was captured in Detroit. Obviously, a suspicious person because he was hanging around a pool hall. So he admitted that he had been on the train, but he was just riding. He said, "No, I'm just riding." Just a couple years later, same line. This is around Dearborn now, but the same line, Detroit to Michigan Central. A robbery happens near Dearborn. And in this case, the thieves are using railroad technology against them. By 1916, electrification is, Thomas said, is the light bulbs. Cities are electrifying. There's electric lights everywhere, and the railroads also used this technology because they learned they could enhance their signaling system. They basically built a series of traffic lights, essentially, rather than depending on the station agent here in Vicksburg, every train that passes by, handing up orders or giving different manually operated signals. They could automate part of this, and if there was a train in the block ahead of you, the light behind you would turn red. So the crooks in this case knew enough about electronics and knew enough about how the railroad worked that they were able to tamper with the signals, turn it from green to red. They knew where the train would stop. They knew what time the express was due. If they set the signal to red, they knew about where he would stop, so they just hid in the bushes, did their little electronic thing, hid in the bushes. The train came up, stopped right where they thought. They emerged from their hiding place and started ransacking the express cars. They detached the engine in the express cars from the rest of the train. They ran a few miles on down the line, so they had somebody who knew how to operate a locomotive as well. Dumped the fire so that they blocked base traffic in both directions on that particular track, and gave themselves time to get away. The one thing I don't always see in these articles or in researching it, I don't always find the end result. Like how far ahead do you then search to try to find if somebody was ever arrested for this? If they aren't arrested immediately, I may not know how this turns out, if they ever caught the criminals or not. This one was kind of an interesting story. Now we're into 1928. We're getting pretty far into the new century. This is in Blissfield, Michigan, small town near the Ohio border, about 5 miles north of Toledo. The bandit's described as little more than a boy, so we can assume a teenager or a young-looking 20-something, dressed nicely. He basically just sort of creeps in, quietly sneaks into the express car, walks up behind the agent who was studying his work and doing his ledgers and basically said, "Stick him up." He tied up the express agent. He walked directly over to a bag containing $50,000 in currency, waited for the train to approach Blissfield, opened up the baggage door facing the platform, and hurled the baggage agent off the train. That, of course, drew the attention of everybody at the station. They all ran over. Why are our company employees flying out the doors of baggage cars? So everybody ran over there to help the expressman. The train stopped at this depot as it was supposed to, and he opened up the door on the other side of the train, got off on the off side, walked over to a waiting car, and drove away. In a master statement of understatement, the article said that the police believed the robber had accomplices.
Really? Wow.
But there's an image of the Blissfield depot. That'd be a few years earlier than 1928. It would have been a bit more built up. The train would have been slightly larger locomotive, but that's kind of what you're looking at there in Blissfield for the 1928 robbery, for the flying baggage man robbery. Sometimes there are just pickpockets walking through the train. Again, back on the poor old Michigan Central, around Centerville, they arrest 5 people working the train as pickpockets, taking advantage of folks returning from a fair, from a county fair, a little weekend excursion. Early on, there are reports of attempts, robberies that don't succeed. They would pile up debris on the tracks in order to make the train stop, and in some cases, the train with the cow catcher just went right on through it and threw their stuff out of the way, or the engineer sees it far enough in advance and gets the train stopped safely before it derails and before there's a wreck. Again, another one, they piled up some old ties trying to derail a train near Niles. So it was not uncommon. There were a good number of reports in the old newspapers. This one I kept in. This one is the only story that's not from Michigan. I kept this in the presentation just because it was. Again, this was one of those that was next to the story that I was looking for. This occurred out in Kansas City. So again, robbers stop the train. They get on the express car and they decide to blow up the safe. But they blew up the entire car.
Sound familiar?
And they scattered papers, documents, waybills, money for an area of about 2 miles by the time it all settled down. So, which of course means
Well, that ought to do it. Think you used enough dynamite there, Butch?
all right. So we had a little fun with some of the more clever or more interesting stories. I'll close out with a couple of the more serious ones. There were unfortunately some that didn't end quite so well. The first one I'll talk about involved railroad police force. I don't know if you're aware of it. Still to this day, it used to be a much larger force of people, but railroads maintain their own police. And they have all the powers of a police. They could arrest you for speeding if they wanted, but their job is to patrol the yards, the tracks, respond to accidents. And in the old days, there were many, many more of them, because remember, all the freight in the country is moving by rail. So railroads had large police forces. And there's a website that has kept track of all the different, and here in Michigan, there have been 10 officers that lost their lives in the line of duty, usually interrupting a robbery that was occurring in a yard or at a station. But 2 of them, and I did this presentation, I forget where we were, but somebody was actually related to Detective Vreeland. His family is still in the area, but we're going to talk about this one in August of 1911. This happened down in Detroit. There was a joint yard facility between 2 different railroads. The Lakeshore Michigan Southern and the Michigan Central jointly owned a yard in the Junction Avenue area. And there had been a number of break-ins. There had been a number of boxcars broken into, goods stolen. And the detectives were starting to focus on this overnight, of course. And the young man, Detective Burnett from the Lakeshore, Michigan Southern, he was a younger officer. He was kind of a go-getter. You know, he was going to get out there. He was going to catch these guys. The Michigan Central detectives are older. They're more experienced. They're mentoring their young friend, but they're a little more laid back. And they decide, Detectives Cook and Vreeland decide they're going to play a little trick on their young buddy. They're going to go out and hide in the yard at midnight, and they're going to jump out from behind a boxcar and yell, "Boo!" Well, they do that, and the young man, Detective Burnett, swings around, pulls out his revolver, and discharges his gun. Killed both of them. Killed both of the other detectives. He ran up thinking that he had shot thieves or robbers, saw what he had done. He collapses from shock. And then later on that evening, it wasn't midnight when all this happened, but later on, approaching midnight, Detective Cook's wife in Detroit was informed of what happened in the railroad yard by a Free Press reporter who was waiting at her apartment building, waiting for her to get back from a movie or a show that her husband was working. So she and a friend had gone to a show. She gets home and a reporter is standing there saying, "So, Mrs. Cook, what do you have any comments about the loss of your husband tonight?" Not a good one. More, again, follow the money. More expense. Some of the more famous or more significant robberies. This, of course, follow the money. Right, in 1890, where's the money in the state of Michigan? It's not yet in Detroit. It's not yet in Lansing. It's up in the Upper Peninsula. There's copper, there's iron ore, there's lumber. And so that means lots of people working. That means big payrolls. That means processed goods flowing out of the UP. And sure enough, the Mineral Range Railroad, a short line that went from Houghton up to Calumet to serve all those mines in the Keweenaw Peninsula, gets hit by a robbery in September of 1893. 5 men, some of them know how to operate a locomotive, board the engine after flagging it down. In those remote areas, you could also flag a train down to have them pick you up. You know, there were flag stops, so they pretended that they were passengers. Turns out they weren't. They again went to the express car. Everybody knew that Friday morning the Mineral Range train was taking the payroll for the Quincy mine and all the other mines up to Calumet. And so they knew there would be $70,000 to $75,000, which is the equivalent of about $2 million in cash on the train. And they stole all the bags of money, did not ransack the train because elsewhere in the passenger car there was a bank teller sitting there very quietly with his briefcase that had $40,000 in it. They didn't catch up to him. They hopped off the train after a few minutes. They stood. They waved goodbye as if they were passengers that had just detrained. The train, think about if this happens today. The area is surrounded by yellow tape, we're shut down. Town is shut down for hours. There's no radio, there's no telephone, there's no cell phone. How do you report a crime like this? You build fire back up in the engine and you run on ahead to the next town. The train arrived 5 minutes late into Calumet. The whole thing took only 5 minutes, and they came screeching into Calumet. We've been robbed. The train's been held up. So, of course, a couple photographs of the Houghton Hancock area in the early days with the railroad stations. Mineral Range, Michigan Tech grad over here. Mineral Range Depot still exists. Both that and a restaurant in one of the other depots. They've preserved their depots up there too. The defense attorney in this particular case, now you would think that stealing the payroll from a bunch of miners at a large payroll would get you a pretty good prison sentence. They were eligible for a life sentence, but the lawyer in this case, Mr. Peters from Newberry, Michigan, made a spirited defense, and the bandits received 5 years in prison instead of the life sentence that they could have had. Probably because it happened pretty quick. They were captured fairly quickly, and they probably didn't have a lot of time to get rid of. They probably returned most of the money. They probably hadn't had the time to spend or hide the money yet. So that brings us to the biggest one that I can find a record of in Michigan, the Fenville robbery in August of 1895. Again, we're going to go after the express car. Chicago and West Michigan, later the Père Marquette line. So this would be the line coming up from Chicago up through New Buffalo and on over towards Grand Rapids. They approach a man who has a lantern, waving a red lantern vigorously, which is a sign, even today, for a train to stop. They had also placed some ties. If that didn't work, they had also placed some ties on the tracks. Two of the bandits hop onto the engine to cover the fireman and the engineer. The other two go back to the express car. Again, we're playing a scene from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The Bernard Van Otten, the express agent in the express car, refuses to open the car up for them. I work for the air. I'm not letting you in. They shoot up the lock, force their way in. Find the safe is locked, and it's a nice big safe, so they use a little bit of dynamite. They blow the door open off the safe, and they discover that the safe is empty. It was a brand new safe that was being transported from the manufacturer in Chicago up to the railroad's offices in Grand Rapids. So now they've gone to all this trouble to stop the train, and they have an empty safe, so we can imagine they're now upset. So they decide they're going to shoot up the train, and they're going to terrorize the passengers and get what they can from cash and jewelry and pocket watches and whatnot. The conductor was robbed of his pocket watch and the princely sum of $7. So now they're getting even madder because they're apparently not getting a whole lot from this robbery attempt. But unfortunately, during the getaway and during all this confusion, they come across the brakeman, Timothy Murphy, who attempts to stop them. They discharge a weapon and they shoot him in the abdomen. So now they have an unsuccessful robbery and they have attempted murder on their history. Everybody takes off into the woods. They hop on other trains going other directions. A manhunt ensues. Two of them now are attempting to leave Grand Rapids later that night. They're recognized. How they were recognized or how the descriptions got passed through various train crews and police agencies so quickly is not clear from the stories that I was reading. But they recognized that these might be the guys, and so a Grand Rapids detective boards, and this is the picture of the Grand Rapids in Indiana State Depot roughly at that time, or it's a wood carving, so it's probably stylized a bit, but it was something like that. So Detective Powers from the Grand Rapids Police Force, he boards the train in order to try to find these guys about 11:30 at night. He finds them. He attempts to arrest them. They shoot Detective Powers. They shoot him in the head. He passes away. He was a veteran of the Civil War. So now they have killed a policeman who was a Civil War veteran in addition to all those other things. So as you can imagine, quite a manhunt ensues, and they decide that they're looking for Michigan's whiskered train robber, John Smalley. No photos appear to exist of this gentleman, but he was well known in his day. He lived up near the Clare area, but traveled around the state, worked this area extensively, or worked downstate extensively. He would raid the trains, then go back up into the northern reaches. He claimed, amongst friends and people who knew him after that he had claimed that he had stolen $1 million in the course of his life, very little of which was ever found in any of his homes or buildings. And still today, you can find articles, podcasts, metal detecting magazine, the treasure hunting magazines will occasionally mention, is the loot from the Whiskered Bandit still buried somewhere in West Michigan? He always wore disguises. He employed body doubles. He employed other members of his family, and so that anytime they were out doing a job, other people could be seen in town or at the other end of town. So there'd be some doubt. Well, no, I'm pretty sure I saw John. I think I saw John at the general store on Saturday afternoon. I saw him and his horse walking in. Well, it was the same horse and it was different. It was the same clothing. They were doing these elaborate kind of ruses. But as you can imagine, they track him down. They track him down to the home of his girlfriend, Cora Black Diamond Brown, is her nickname. Her mother and brother and Cora, they take off when the patrol surrounds the cabin and says, we have you surrounded. They take off. John decides to shoot it out and loses. And that's the end of John Smalley, the Whiskered Bandit. Or is it? Was all of this a big mistake, or are we experiencing fake news in 1895? A month later, the Detroit Free Press runs a story that the sheriff's deputies, the posse that had gone out chasing after John Smalley, they were chasing the wrong John Smalley. They were supposed to be chasing after his son Oscar, or a cousin, John A. or John F. Smalley, was also involved in this somehow, and they had captured and shot up the wrong house and the wrong guy. And the right guy was now out in an undisclosed location in Oklahoma. They bought land. The Smalley gang had invested in property and buildings way out west. Again, they could hop on using the train, using the railroad company's technology against them. They could hop on the train and escape while things cooled down and then come back to their home in Michigan. So it was pretty certain, though, that he really was involved, or that he masterminded this whole scheme. And he had also been involved with, in Kendallville, Indiana, an even larger robbery that acquired $250,000, the equivalent of $6.5 million back in the day. I have not. There are other stories and presentations about the Kendallville robbery. I'm not up to speed on that one, but that was the story of Michigan's whiskered train robber and the story of train robberies in Michigan. So there you go. So I have a couple of slides about some upcoming events, but are there any questions about this? Yes.
At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that there's a lot less railroad police than there used to be.
Mm-hmm.
As a little kid, I was growing up in Chicago, and we were near Beacon Chimes. And you'd walk through the rail car, boom, boom, boom.
Oh, yeah.
But they were big chimes, too.
Yeah.
A lot of railroad traffic, not a car yard, but a lot of railroad traffic. And as a little kid, you were taught to live in fear of the railroad police.
Oh, yeah.
Don't go in that yard.
Right.
They've got clubs and merciful. And I don't know if they were, but I believed everything I ever heard. That happened to me.
Yep.
And yet, now as we sit and watch cars going through Vicksburg, box cars, rail cars, with painting elaborate.
Yeah, graffiti. Yeah, some
They had to obviously be on the ladder.
some artwork. Yeah.
Where are there still railroad police? Evidently not.
There are some, but they don't seem to be able to deal with the graffiti.
It's not a concern.
Yeah, it's just not a
They even
concern.
have graffiti artist shows on
Yeah.
occasion, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
You'll see them quite often. They'll sit in the depot parking lot in their little SUVs. Just
Watching. They're
I've seen
watching.
them a lot lately.
Yeah.
The last few months.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. I think a lot. Yeah, a lot of. I mean, they do investigations on gangs or rings that are breaking into the cars, and they have to investigate traffic incidents or trespasser incidents, of course, fatalities. But yeah, they don't seem to chase away the graffiti. I think there's too many graffiti artists and not enough police. But like you, I often wonder. I see some of that stuff go by. It's like, how did he have 4 hours to do that? You know, how did? Yeah, how did nobody ever see him out there in the yard?
So, at the beginning, you mentioned the distinction between robberies targeting moving trains and stop trains. Seems like there's, through the stories that you said, that there's a number of different modes. It seems like robberies occurred in where maybe someone would get on at a station, rob it in motion and stop it in a remote area, get off, or stop it in a remote area, get on, rob it there, get off, or maybe get on a station, rob it, and get off of that. Like, is there maybe one primary mode? It seems most, maybe not even just in Michigan, but is it just kind of everything happens?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I as I started into the research, I focused more on the passenger trains or the moving trains being held up. There were dozens more stories about the clerk or the agent at the fixed depot or at the depot being held. I didn't go into that's just sort of a typical break-in story, right?
Yeah.
I was focused more on the activities that are happening on the train, or on the moving train.
Did you see any significant number of stories where they were targeting like a stationary train in a depot or a station?
Nothing. I mean, the bigger cities had more of those stories, but it occurred in smaller towns too. It occurred in smaller places as well. Yeah. I didn't. There could be many more hours spent digging into the so I didn't keep track of all the different hits that came up on newspaper.com. But yeah. Oh, yes.
Just a point on railroad police. Just in the last 30 days, the community has met the Grand Trunk representative, Canadian National officer. He has been dealing with the community, and he is now responsible from Battle Creek to Indiana. So that gives you an idea of the geography.
One off.
His territory covers Battle Creek all the way down to the Indiana line.
He's retired Mishawaka.
Okay.
Police, and now he loves his job.
Right.
It was really interesting to see him because he's very interactive with the community, meeting people, talking to people. He's working the Battle Creek to Vicksburg area the last few weeks, dealing with trespassing and making sure you understand what the boundaries are, warning people about the width of a train, and why it's dangerous to get close.
Yeah.
A lot of their work is also Operation Lifesaver type. Don't trespass on train tracks. Don't crawl under a stopped train. Don't walk in the gauge with your music playing, your earphones
So
on.
a
lot of that,
interactive. And the other thing he's done is they have maintenance crews at Schoolcraft, which is just down the line here.
Yep.
And he has been pulling them out and assigning them to crossings for visibility issues.
Okay.
So you can see all the different things that officers work.
Right.
And a mirror image to what you just said, the Great Lakes Central that Dean talked about, that's behind us, it covers a major part of the Lower Peninsula, one officer. And he's just as charismatic. He really loves his job and safety. To give you an example, And I know I pulled all my hair out. Dean started to pull his out. We had someone, we had no control over it, but we found out about it. We put people at certain crossing guards when we do our Christmas trains. And somebody before we got there laid down in between the rails, getting ready to take a picture. Took a picture of him doing that, and posted it on the internet. And they went after him, as rightly they should. I mean, just people have no concept. You probably do, and all of you that have talked to your officers, how dangerous trains can be. They can't stop. You know, so it's but they same person. Butch is the one at GLC. He sounds just like your friend, your police friend. Same thing.
This is just a train question.
Yeah.
About robberies. When I was a kid, on Michigan State's campus, they had a locomotive and a full car.
Mhm.
We used to go play on that.
That's it.
That's the one.
That's it.
I heard rumors of that, but I wasn't sure. So
Yeah.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, it was
You
donated.
gotta just go play on that.
Yeah, it was donated to Michigan State in 1957. A group of students actually got together in 1969 and started to restore it. Initially, just to clean it up because they were rail fans, but pretty soon they got the idea to see if they could bring it back to life and pull a football train, a trip to Ann Arbor, Columbus, or South Bend, or wherever. Some of those first students are still in our organization. We've still never made it to a football game. But we do pole excursions other places, and now we have the North Pole Express runs. So yeah, but that's the one. Yeah, it spun off from Michigan State, became an independent group, and now we're an independent museum. But that's the one.
Longevity and changing.
Yeah, that's the one. You'll see. We've got there's some brochures up here actually. So. There's a few photos from MSU's campus there on that page. So,
and if you like them, we're more than happy.
Bruce
tells a lot about us.
Yeah,
Plus, before you leave, as a treat, we'll bring her to life with some video clips if you'd like to see them. You want to see it? They're very cool. Who would like? Anybody like a brochure?
Yeah, our website, MichiganSteamTrain.com. Michigan Steam Train, all one word. You'll see our upcoming events. We talked a lot about the North Pole trains. We are going to make it to a football game, but we're going to pull it with a diesel this year. We aren't going to use the steam engine, but we are going to Central Michigan from Owasso up to CMU for a football game, their kickoff game this year on September 9th. And we have a couple other things happening too. Yes,
Do you only do one trip with the North Pole?
no, 21 this year.
Really? And
We
they're all
run-
sold out?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we're always looking for additional capacity. I mean, if we can get some additional coaches, we're looking to see what we can do to try to have them this year. But we share the tracks, as we said. We don't own the railroad. Great Lakes Central moves freight Monday through Friday. We get out there and we're kind of in their way. There aren't a lot of places to pass, and we give everybody a couple hours up in the village of Ashley.
So
And,
what's the start and the finish and what places?
Yeah, so we leave from Owasso. It takes us about an hour to get up to the village of Ashley. They decorate a country Christmas theme thing going on. And next, Santa Claus is there, of course, and arts and crafts and food trucks and all that. The passengers get about 2 hours in the village, and then we run back to Owasso for an hour. So it's about a 4 hour day,
And
4 hour
then
trip.
how does a person know when tickets go on sale?
So we so on our website we do keep a notify me list. It works like it's like a constant contact kind of a list. You can add your email address to that notify me list, and as we've got schedules or anytime we have an event, I try not to use it. I don't want to be one of those that sends you a piece of mail every day. I don't want to be one of the. But a few times a year, we'll send out a blast or notify me list. Here's the schedule.
Links available at your website.
MichiganSteamTrain.com in the contact contact us schedule. Yeah, it's contact us section. Yeah.
The bottom of your trifold, I think Dean
Yeah.
mentioned.
Oh yeah.
Is our address. Go on our website and leave your email address. As Dean said, you'll be put on that list.
So
Did
you
you
got
say
your
earlier that you do fundraisers that we could book something?
We could. Yeah, we could.
Yes.
We're trying. We're trying. We've leased or we've rented the train before to folks who want to sell their own tickets. We're trying to partner up with. There's at least one. There's a children's charity in town that we're trying to work something out with this year. I'd like to do one or two. We're trying to get back to doing some more events, both with our railroad equipment and other things. So yeah, we have a couple dining cars. Most of our fleet is standard coaches, and we've got some bi-level, some parlor car. We used to run on Amtrak. Three cabooses. Riding cabooses is kind of fun. So yeah. Let's see.
Riding in Greenfield Village. Only better.
We'll try. We'll try.
Is there
another? Oh, it's on the back. Yeah,
Oh.
okay.
Of course.
Yeah. There's a couple of video
You can
clips
call 'em
that
up and
compare.
Then I can.
Yeah, there's a
ID
couple of video clips that compare our operating locomotive, Air Marquette 1225,
Fun to see it
with the
upside
Polar
down,
Express
isn't it?
movie. So.
Do you have any box cars
Yes. Yep.
that could ride open? We had one of our town solvers, late Dr. Howard
There you
Schneider, wrote
Excellent.
our historical book. But Arnold was a great boxcar rider.
A hobo, really?
He had, yeah.
Oh my.
And he regaled us with many great stories of jumping on and jumping off. And
Yeah,
some days
we
he just do it to do it. Other
yeah,
days
we
he did it for a reason.
we highly don't recommend that.
Yeah.
I just want to be very, very clear. Butch, if you're watching, we do not recommend that activity.
Well, it's
we
hard to
have
find
used
an
our.
open boxcar anymore.
They keep them sealed up, and a lot of it's container freight now with a truck trailer. We have some freight cars we use as storage. We've also used them as props in photo freights, or occasionally we get inquiries about a movie that might want to use them. So we keep a couple of freight cars around, both for ourselves, for our own on-site storage, really. Because railroad equipment comes with a lot of parts and supplies and things that you need to keep out of the
We have a very
away from
rare
the customers.
sleeper car, and one of only a handful. And a French movie organization came a few years ago and shot some scenes for their movie in our car, and it's pretty cool. And a lot of the equipment in it still operates. She doesn't look real pretty on the outside, but
Yeah,
she's
we gotta get that one
Yeah,
to the shop.
but
We got
she-
some body- we got
it's
some body work.
fantastic.
We got
You
some
know,
body work to do.
all the mini sites and the suites and 4-bed suite, all kinds of stuff. Now we're going to show you a few of these I think you'll enjoy. Here's a not a high speed run by, but a run by. Let's see here. How do we? VLC? Okay. Go by you,
That was supposed to be a snow train. That was in January.
Yeah. Didn't you see the snow?
Yeah.
It was spouting out of the side of the train.
Shooting out of it really fast.
Now this one you'll find. This is something you want to go to bed with. Very relaxing. This is through the countryside, running forward from north and south and south. We as volunteers still feel magic. Now, I'll show you one or two more, and then we will not. We'll stay as long as you like, but we figured you'd like to see her come to life.
Is the color of the smoke or the steam, is that based on what's burning?
It,
Wood versus coal?
different
Or-
factors.
Yeah, well, it's always coal.
Yeah.
We always burn coal. A good, clean, hot fire, you won't hardly see. It should just be white steam, white steam coming out. Black smoke indicates a little heavy on the coal. It's not burning quite as efficiently as it should. It's a real, the fireman and the engineer, it's a real balancing act. And there's no automated controls. It's just valves and levers and hand scoops. There is a stoker motor, of course, that functions. But if you get a little too heavy or
This one.
you can get that black. And sometimes for photo charters, they want to see dramatic black smoke.
We were not laying behind it in the panic. It was Mr. GoPro, I think. Oh, that's not the one I wanted to show you. We'll show you. But obviously, this is from the movie, and if you older children have not seen the movie, we suggest you do that because it will turn you into a young child. This will be the last. I'll show you. This is. We try to reenact some of the aspects that happen. Oh, okay. No, we don't. We go to the village and have a good time with you. How's that? I just got jabbed in the back. Now I'll show you one part of this. You're very sharp in your railroad observation. There's a passenger on the outside of the train, which is an absolute no-no, and Dean will back me up. Total safety violation. But he's a little guy on the outside of the train, and I want you to see if you can spot him. I'll tell you when. Not him. Look right down here. Tell me if you see anybody right down in this area. so quick. Who is that? Oh, come on. He's blue, but he's normally green. Hermit. So you can tell, as Dean said, we do a lot of things. We have a lot of fun, and it's just a magical trip most of the time. You'll enjoy it if you get a chance to ride with us.